Okay, we'll take all the speakers for the day, come up on stage, and we have many pre-asked questions from the community, as well as, I'm sure, plenty of live questions as well. So get ready. There's a lot of questions. Well, thank you everybody for sticking around. The room is still full, which I find incredible. And I know that everyone had a lot of questions, but we really wanted to get all of the information out there and get through the day, so we'll do our best to answer everyone's questions. There are a ton here. I'm not going to only ask these, but these were pre-asked by people that are online that couldn't be here today or that really had burning desires and wanted their questions to be prioritized. So I'm going to start with these, and then anyone that has live questions, there's a very bright light in my eyes, and I cannot see if you're raising your hand for a question, but certainly someone can shout out if there are burning questions in the room as well. But let me just start with some of these. We have everybody? Okay. So the first question, I'll just go in order of speakers, goes to John. There you go, see? Our keynote has to get the first question. So the question was, having had insight into the early research in changing status of rare monogenetic neurodevelopmental disorders on the autism spectrum over the last few decades, how do you view the status of Angelman syndrome research, and what gaps do you feel need further exploration?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think a simple way to say is Angelman is just way out ahead, way out ahead. I don't think there's another group in the neurodevelopmental space that could have a meeting like this in terms of the critical mass of energy and patient organization. I mean, more of the same, I think, is the gap. Just, more of what you're doing. That's the simple answer.
Thanks to you. Thanks to all of you. The next question was actually to me. I'll ask myself a question. What avenues in translational research haven't yet been explored? Which ones have been or are frozen due to funding issues? So, to be honest, that's what InSync is all about, is trying to figure out what avenues haven't been explored and where else do we need to investigate and dive into. And after 3 years of bringing in people a heck of a lot smarter than us, what we've learned is there's very little that's unexplored. The last thing that we really felt strongly about, because of the fact that we've invested so heavily in UBE3A replacement or activation, was that all of the other genes outside of UBE3A for the largest genotype on the planet for Angelman syndrome are not yet explored. And so that was the motivation to bring in Nadav to really help us figure out what other solutions can we come up with for the deletion genotype, which is different than the non-deletion genotype. And a mouse model may not be able to tell very strong differences because their brain is not nearly as complex, but in humans we think there's a big problem. So now I'm hoping that we're investing in the right spot, and we invested in the landing pads and the iPSC cell lines and the organoids for the same reason, for the UPD-ICD differences and for the deletion differences, to understand the RNA difference and the gene differences. So I think that was the last stone unturned that I could come up with, but I'm sure in 6 months there'll be other stones unturned. Base editing is the only other thing for the mutations, which would be really personalized medicine to another level. And I think that will be the next 10 years, probably, will be base editing. I don't know if anybody else has other thoughts, but that was what I came up with for an answer. Okay. Nadav,
Can I just respond?
Yeah.
There's the known unknowns, and then there's the unknown unknowns. There may be always work to do.
There's always work to do, which is why we go to conferences and we listen and we learn and we approach people on panel discussions with us to say, I like what you're doing, can you help Angelman syndrome? That's right. Okay, this is actually for Nadav. This is a very nice one. Welcome to the Angelman community. That was what someone online said. Your talk was very impressive and is certainly exciting for the largest genotype affected by AS. What inspired you to start working on Angelman syndrome, and do you feel your approach has the potential to translate to human application quickly?
Thanks, and thanks for the great question. Really what inspired me, as I said in my beginning, is also my own genetic disease, and also knowing I have in my family also a few others genetic disease, sadly, that have always inspired me. And then Allison, of course, meeting her, I think 8 years ago, who really hooked me in and got me to work on Angelman. And this approach that we're using, what I think is amazing about it is it's not only will be, if works, for Angelman, but there's over 250 microdeletion syndromes in humans where big chunks of chromosomes are missing. And so if it works, you can envision doing exactly the same thing also for those. And so with Angelman, hopefully you can do a proof of principle that it works, and this will be helpful also for many, many other genetic diseases.
Great, thank you. This question is for Dr. Bayless. What do you feel is the most likely platform that can be utilized with for human application with your new technology?
That's a great question. I would say the two that I highlighted, so doing UBE3A attached to the ZIP, which is basically an enzyme replacement therapy, so there's a lot of research already in that area. And then also building on the CRISPR and attaching ZIP to that, because the field right now is just absolutely exponentially expanding. So the research that's being done is something that I could build on.
Great. Dr. Siegel? There's a few for you, but I'm going to go with one for now. We have been hearing about zinc fingers since 2015. And it seems to have really taken a sideline over the past few years. Do you see a clear path forward for this approach because your new paper published is incredibly promising? And how does that compare to other paternal activation strategies like CRISPR, miRNA, and ASOs?
Right. Well, yeah, it's been around for a little while. So there were various reasons why there was a delay in getting it to the stage that it was at, but we're very happy that it's reached a stage where it does really seem like it's something that could be moving forward. Like I say, we've been receiving a lot of interest in this, and so we're having some discussions with groups that might take this forward. So that's very exciting. As far as how it would compare to some of the other strategies that are out there, I think I would just kind of repeat the strategy that FAST has had all along, which is that they want to take multiple shots on goal, and we don't want to be in the business of trying to guess the best horse. We want to bet on all the horses, and then we'll see, because we'll have trials. I mean, we'll have preclinical trials, right? And things may fail in preclinical trials for not because of the wrong endpoints. That's not going to happen, but because it doesn't meet it, right? So we'll have preclinical trials, and then, if that succeeds, there'll be clinical trials, and then we'll know.
Great answer. Dr. Liu, there you are. How does your large deletion AS model, in your mind, compare to the exon 2 mutation model?
I mean, difference, they do have a lot of difference. The major issue on my hand is it's very hard to breed for that lines. Majority of the large deletion moms, they can give birth to the pups, but they are not able to raise them up. This is very challenging for me when I do the breeding things. And then I have normal mom to stay with them and for a few rounds of laboring, and they can gradually learn how to feed their pups. And for another thing, during the behavior test, I also noticed, and my mentor also reminded me, my rotor test looks a little different with other people's. I provide 4 rounds training for all my Angelman mice. I do feel if we spend more time, more patience with those mice, the same way that we spend more time and be patient with our kids, and it's very helpful. I only provide the test, do the recording on their scores when they have the saturation of, when they have saturation of the training, when they are able to stand on the road for more than 2 minutes, then I do the test on them. Otherwise, I feel it's not fair for them. They deserve more care.
Jennifer, what can families do to further support all of your incredible efforts at the ABOM and as it relates to biomarkers and endpoint development?
Oh, that's easy. Participate in natural history studies and surveys. as I mentioned before, so much of what we learn comes from the experience in the natural history study as to how outcomes behave. And then also this, surveys when Dr. Reeves talked about the ORCA, and that original development came through community interactions and surveys. So there's lots of great examples of where you participate in the process. You're a key stakeholder. This is how we get patient focus into the drug development program. And again, Ryan's going to speak about that tomorrow, so I encourage you to attend his talk. But just, when we're asking for things, it's because we need information from you. So the more you participate, the more it helps us.
Great. And that goes to Wen-Han, actually, with the natural history study. Question for you is, in your opinion, is Angelman syndrome well characterized enough, or will regulators have questions about what we know of the disease course and how that relates to different ages? Do we have a full picture across all ages?
So I think there are two components to that question. One is age. And I think we do know about the younger kids with Angelman syndrome better than we do the older individuals and the adults. So we certainly need more data on adults. As you can see from my talk, only about 10% of the participants in our natural history study, at least at the time of enrollment, were over the age of 19. So I do think we need more information on that. I also think that there are aspects of Angelman syndrome that are well characterized, and then there are certain aspects, phenotypes, that are not as well characterized. And that is one of the things we are trying to focus on in the natural history study, is to place more emphasis on components of Angelman syndrome that we still do not fully understand. And I think Dr. Carson gave a great example of dystonia, movement disorders. I think that is one component of Angelman syndrome that we are still trying to figure out.
Yep, I agree. This one is for Anjali. Is there any more work that the parents can help support to try to explain and truly understand what would be considered meaningful benefit for them based off of the small panel that you had? Is there more that the families can contribute to help you further answer that question?
So right now we're trying to figure out whether the sample size we had was enough. So we had a sample of about 19 participants, and about 15 approximately attended the sessions reliably. This is usually the most that we have for Delphi panels, but I think we need to make sure that we replicate it and it's replicable across different countries, right? I think that's going to be really important to see. I think we are at the point where we're pulling our data and trying to figure out, do we need more information, and can that be disseminated through a survey? But the complexity of the issue is what we're trying to manage. But I do think it's really critical that this at least be replicable in different countries. We want to see, is meaningful the same? It's supposed to be, right? But I think to get data on that will, even if it's a small sample, if we get that, I think that put together would give us a big N.
So maybe we need to bring in global to truly
Yes, absolutely.
be able to do it similarly in different languages.
Yeah, and just small sample sizes, because this is a huge commitment. But I think replicating it in 1 or 2 or 3 more countries just to see that cross-culturally there are no differences on what parents feel when meaningful would be really important.
Hey, Ellen, we got a job for you. Okay, we already put you to work. She didn't start yet. Okay, this is for Bryce. Has the additional support that you've received by the FDA with nearly a dozen other neurodevelopmental disorders for the ORCA that the AS community developed helped to advance the ORCA in the minds of the regulatory agency, and has that feedback helped to support its use in Angelman syndrome?
Wonderful question. Clarifying exactly what you said there is that we've developed this original ORCA measure in Angelman syndrome, and as it's starting to be more popular and used, we then responded to a call from the FDA, who was seeking to develop core outcomes and core endpoints in rare diseases. And so we submitted an application, and that application was accepted. And what this opportunity allows for the ORCA measure, both for these other neurodevelopmental disorders, but also for Angelman syndrome, is it gives us an opportunity to collaborate with the FDA early so they can see how the ORCA was developed from the very start to where it currently is today, and to receive that early input from them about how to create a body of evidence that would make them and other end users comfortable with how the orga was constructed, what the scores mean, and how they translate to looking at changes in communication over time. So I can never speak for the FDA themselves, but I know through this interactions that they are becoming much more familiar with the ORCA measure. We are becoming more familiar with what the FDA expects out of the measure, and we think this will translate to ideally better acceptance of the ORCA measure in regulatory trials moving forward.
Great. This is for Mindy. How do you see the videos being used for regulatory approvals in Angelman syndrome? They seem to be so telling and powerful to capture things in a clinical setting, but seems that the regulators are pretty resistant. How can we change their perspective?
Yeah. So the first interaction I had with regulatory around video capture was literally bringing those videos of my son into FDA. And their reaction was, the same. These are very compelling, but they need to be standardized, rigorous, and quantified. So we essentially took that as marching orders. And our strategy since then has been produce data, analyze data, publish, so that we can get this into the literature as much as possible. So on the Duchenne side, I wouldn't necessarily say that they have been resistant. I think that there is a movement in rare disease at the present time that I can only characterize as bringing anecdotal video to the door of FDA, along with some torches and pitchforks, and that's only going to work for so long. And so I think our job is to differentiate what we're doing, which is developing a rigorous and validated outcome from this approach of, hey, let's text some videos to FDA and see what happens, and make sure that we're educating regulatory about the differentiation of what we're doing. And so the Duchenne video assessment that we're working on is in FDA's qualification pathway. We're about 2 weeks away from submitting our qualification plan, and that will open up discussion, and the same kind of explanation. It will open up discussion and allow us to educate FDA about the rigor with which we've built these outcomes, and a lot of the same discussions, like our approach to the definition of meaningful change, is going to be a little bit different than an anchoring approach. I fully expect that there will be significant debate with regulators about that, but I feel strongly that if we take an anchoring approach, we're just going to carry forward, errors inherent to the anchoring instrument into our new outcome. So those discussions we'll be able to have in the context of Duchenne, but it's thematic across all of the outcomes that we're building. So my hope is that in the coming months that we'll be able to change some minds about what we're doing and the way that video can be used, as long as we continue to kind of differentiate between showing up with the townspeople to force FDA to do your will.
Well, I would say that the FAST community has been very proud for people to ride on our coattails, but we're really proud to ride on your coattails because we need to ride on someone else's for a little while. So good, keep going. And then this question is for Dr. Carson. What do you feel is the best therapeutic for NEM?
I wish I could say there was one. I think the challenge is first knowing exactly what we're talking about, and is this truly non-epileptic myoclonus versus something else? And I think it all merges together. So I'm not specifically avoiding. All I will say is from the data we have, if we group it, what families have said has been the most effective are benzodiazepines. And for any movement disorder, if somebody goes to sleep, it will go away. So is it that benzodiazepines work because of a GABAergic mechanism, or is it just puts people to sleep? But the only other thing that's shown up in that very good category has been triaxiphenidol, which is an anticholinergic.
Okay, that sounds like Parkinsonian, yeah. Okay, so why don't we take some questions from, I have many more, but why don't we see if there's questions in the audience? We have one over here.
Thank you. First of all, I just really applaud all of you, and it's just unbelievable the work you're doing, and we thank you so much as a dad of a 37-year-old. This is a two-part question, a real quick one for you, Allison. What would you estimate is the percentage of the known Angelman population who are considered adults, maybe over 20, whatever?
Say the last part, who are considered for what?
Who are considered adults.
Adults. That's a really hard question, and I might have to defer to Wen Han on this because I think he sees more patients like from a demographic perspective than I do. Of the patients and the community members and the families that we know, I would probably say of everyone that I am in contact with, probably 15 to 20%. But in the global registry, Megan can speak to this, they have a lot of demographics of 2,300 individuals. Yeah. You see hundreds of patients as well. So Megan, you can probably answer that as well. I would say probably a quarter to a third.
So I think it's a really good question. It's a really challenging question to answer. Part of the challenge is that we do not really know the true prevalence of Angelman syndrome, right? So we throw out numbers 1 in 10,000, 1 in 20,000. I would sometimes argue maybe up to 1 in 30, 40,000. And I would also argue that to the best of our knowledge, adults with Angelman syndrome have a reasonably normal lifespan, and therefore you can sort of take, if you take, say, US, for example, take a US population, what's the population of US, that's adults over 18 or over 20, take that number divided by your favorite prevalence digit, that theoretically should be the number of adults with Angelman syndrome, right? So that is a mathematical game. The problem is that I think a lot of adults are unidentified and undiagnosed. Because remember that up until the late 1990s, we really did not have good genetic testing for Angelman syndrome. UBE3A was not even known to be a gene associated with Angelman syndrome until 1997. We knew back in the sort of early 90s, late 1980s, early 1990s, that it was caused by a deletion. We just did not know the gene. So if you were born, if you have Angelman syndrome and you were born in the 1950s, 1960s, you probably would never have been diagnosed. And I had this experience once where I gave a talk at Mass General Hospital, which is an adult hospital in Boston. And at the end of my talk on Angelman syndrome, an adult neurologist came up to me and said she works in this group home, residential home for adults with developmental disabilities. And she said there probably are a number of Angelman adults living in a home that no one has ever diagnosed, because what do you say in those days? You have intellectual disability, we put you in a home, and that's it. Right. So I think newborn screen is going to be the way forward for us to actually know that prevalence. Right. If we do large-scale newborn screen, hundreds of thousands of people, then we'll get a much better sense of what the true prevalence is, and then you can extrapolate that to adults.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That was the short question. But thanks very much for that. Let's just say a quarter or a third, something like that. Yeah, so that really probably sets up the next question that you expected I would ask, and I would just ask that one or more of you would just comment on the research and clinical trials that are being done in your various areas of expertise that are focused on adults living with Angelman syndrome.
Sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
Well, all day we've talked quite a bit about work being done. More times than not, it was focused on a younger population or on children and so forth. I guess from a selfish standpoint, I'd like to know a little bit more about what efforts, whether it's in an adult mouse model, if there's one out there, or anything else you might want to comment that would focus more on adults living with Angelman syndrome.
I can take this one, I think I know exactly where you're going, and I think I have a reasonable answer for you. And I think tomorrow, as we talk about clinical trials, you're going to get a lot more of this, because what you're going to recognize very quickly, and maybe with some pleasure, is that the gene therapy trials that are coming next, of which there will be many, are going to likely start in adults. And so that's just the way it's likely going to be. And I think adults are having their day. I think that the data we showed, there's plenty of adult mouse models. And the data we showed earlier with age and that heat map shows that as much as we can learn from a mouse and its relationship to rescue with age, it's not dramatically different. Of course, earlier probably is going to result in a better outcome faster. It doesn't mean it's going to result in a better outcome overall. And mice have such a short lifespan, and their age and their complexity is so different from human. How do we interpret that they're not quite as good at 42 days of age on the rotarod as they are at 21 days on the rotarod? Like, what does that actually mean for an adult versus an adolescent versus a little kid? We have no idea. So I think the fact that there's really exciting, promising data coming out of the open label trials right now, of course they're open label, but they are including kids as young as 1 and as old as 40. And so and they're all our kids, so I mean that with no disrespect when I call everybody a kid, because in my world, they're all our kids, right? Yeah. This is our family. So I think that the human data is going to tell that story. I think the adults are about to have their day, because I think all of these gene therapies are going to start there. And the pediatrics are going to be waiting behind for good data from the adults so that they can enroll. And I think that's what's going to happen.
Thank you very much.
You got it.
So on the clinical research front, I would say that in the current iteration of the natural history study, we have introduced some questions that interrogate specifically healthcare complications in adults. So are they at increased risk for coronary artery disease, of type 2 diabetes, of all the adult issues that we don't normally see in pediatrics? We do not know that question, but this is why we need to enroll more adults, because we are starting to ask those questions in our study.
Yeah, so we do need the adults in the natural history study, because these trials are going to have to compare to age-matched controls. And most of the people in the studies are between age 5 and 12, because those are the parents that it's easier to travel with your child when they're between 5 and 12 than when they're 37. But we do need to encourage adults going into these trials, because that's what we're going to be comparing to.
Can I make one more point on that?
Yeah.
So if it does turn out that there's some symptoms that are not fixed in an older population, on the research side, that just means we're not done, and we got to keep going.
That's right. I agree.
I was just going to add one more plug. I mean, if I keep kind of going back to the Duchenne experience here, but I mean, that's how we started, right, with the ambulatory population. We're going to include the ambulatory population in clinical trials and the non-ambulatory population. And so it was a bit of an afterthought then with outcome measure development as well, that we brought performance of upper limb on board, much later than kind of the outcomes targeting the ambulatory population. So I think it's important, and that's why with what we're trying to work on with the video assessment, we included, patients that were minimally ambulatory, who were, primarily older patients, looking at how much assistance they require to transfer from one location to another, another location. Older adults that actually use crawling as a means of locomotion and things like that. So just anticipating that infrastructure that needs to be built from the beginning and questioning its applicability to the adult population is going to be necessary now, to make sure that those trials can be run later.
Yeah, totally agree. Other questions in the audience?
Alison, it's Megan Cross. I was just going to comment on what you said earlier. We have 766 in the global registry over 18. I'll get a further breakdown of those age groups. I agree with Wen Han. There's going to be that much older group that aren't diagnosed, but what we can collect from the people we know about, we can start to learn where those people are.
So that's like more than a third. So
that's right.
That's a lot. Yeah,
it is.
Join the registry, get your data in there. There you go. Good for you. Okay, do we have any other questions from the audience?
Yes. My question is for Dr. Carson. We're here with our daughter, who's 23, who has recently started some abnormal tongue movements. So my two questions for you are you seeing that with other individuals with Angelman syndrome? And my second question is, to gather further insight of maybe what is going on and if she would benefit from any of the drugs that you talked about for treatment, do you offer some sort of virtual assessment or even in person for an adult with Angelman syndrome?
So yes, I've definitely seen other cases where it looks like there's a kind of a facially predominant myoclonus. I can't see where you are, so I feel like it throws me off.
Over there.
Like
Over
where
there.
I'm, okay. So where are you located?
We are in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
In
Milwaukee.
Okay. Anyone that's in a state contiguous with Tennessee, I'm good to go. If you're a little further, then we'd have to be more creative. It'd probably have to be more in person, but I'm always happy to talk.
And I would be willing to take her to Tennessee if that's what it takes.
All right, well, we'll talk after.
Sounds good,
Just
thank
come
you.
find me.
Over drinks outside.
That too. I would, I'm biased on some of the phenotypes, and I would be curious if some of our mouse or even the pig model people that spoke yesterday file a few affected mice away and let them grow old. I know for those, I used to do a lot of mice research, and that's not something we tend to enjoy doing, but it would be really curious to see if in the older mice that if phenotypes start to evolve that we just haven't appreciated yet.
Great. Okay.
Can I ask one more? It's Terry
Yeah.
Jo from Combined Brain
Go ahead.
again. Okay, this is for Wenhan and Rob. So, Rob, you're finding this Parkinsonian phenotype, and I think you're totally right. It looks like it. But Wenhan, we already tried L-DOPA and it didn't work. So, what do you think's going on there?
Simple answer is I do not know. The more complicated answer is that you will remember that in our L-DOPA trial, we limited it to ages 4 to 12. And it may be that if we had expanded this to adults, we might have seen something different. Also remember that when the L-DOPA trial started back in 2010 to 2011, so this is like over 12, 13 years ago. We really didn't know much about tremors, much less any other complex movement disorders in Angelman syndrome at that time. So that was not one of our outcome measures. I will say that we did use the modified UPDRS, Unified Parkinson Disease Rating Scale, as one of our outcome measures. We didn't really see a movement on that, but as I say, I think part of the problem is that one, we were really focused on overall cognition development, developmental impact of L-DOPA, and two, our age group was probably too small. Yeah.
So I would just clarify, just so everyone's on the same page. When we talk about Parkinsonism or Parkinsonism movements, where it's a descriptive term of slowed movements, and in some cases, kind of what we'd seen in some of our evaluations are, kind of a lack of a facial expression. So again, we're not talking about Parkinson's disease. That's a whole different thing. But is there some degree of a shared phenotype that, again, suggests molecular pathways and potential therapeutic approaches we might use?
So, Rob, can I just ask, do you think there's a basal ganglia problem in Angelman syndrome? Because isn't that sort of sine qua non of Parkinson's disease? It's abnormalities in basal ganglia.
So when we're talking about the basal ganglia, we're talking about deeper brain structures. So the cortex is the outer part of the brain. For example, where epileptic seizures come from, the deeper brain structures, the basal ganglia, are areas of the brain that help control our motor movements. And that is, again, the area that is affected in Parkinson's disease. And we know, and this goes back to Philpott and Judson's studies, that in the mouse model, they did see changes in both the anatomy and in neurotransmitters that are involved in these deeper brain structures. So why, I think it's still an interesting question of why do some phenotypes present later in life and not earlier? And I don't think we know.
And why do some get it and some don't at all? It's also so heterogeneous, which is also very interesting. Okay, so in the last 5 minutes, those of you who have been on the stage before know what I'm about to do, so got to get to thinking. I'm going to ask each one of you, in 1 minute or less, to say something to our community about advice you can give us on what we can do what we've done, just lasting words of impact for them to walk away with in the Angelman community. Barb? Words of wisdom, last words.
I would say just continue, coming to the events, being engaged, following the research that you can, and continue supporting the research because it starts at the ground in the laboratories and then it moves forward. And without that, we're not going to be at the place where we need to be to continue pushing more things through clinical trials. And also just continue being the awesome community that you are. I have known many patient communities. This is by far my favorite.
I would say share your stories. We're going to need a lot of help in making people outside of this room aware of your needs as a community. And we are sort of, I think, at a point where we're starting to hopefully, maybe, advance deeper into development. Late stage development could be around the corner. Later stage trials is what I mean. And an important part of that process in eventually getting something to an approval is for you to engage and for your needs to be heard. And to do that, we need to make global regulators aware of your stories. And so the more that you can do that, and Ryan's going to talk more about that, like I said, and help us raise that awareness, the better.
I want to thanks for all the support I got so far from the fest. And for any other things, since I do a lot of mice work, I really want to find a way to correlate my mice work with the final patients. Something come to my mind that could be, I'm curious about some patients carry the point mutation. If there's a way I can project those information onto my mice, I maybe find some specific way to provide a more individual treatment. Since also the next generation sequencing is so popular right now and the price goes down. And our team also very good at the long reading sequencing and doing the capture things. We have a lot of captured UB3A and antisense data for using the normal human brain tissue. I would like to say if there is some mutant patients information, I could use that to predict which antisense they have, or which mRNA of the UB3A they miss or they have. That may be some more information for those patients.
I'd like to thank the Fest for funding us. And for me, I'm part of many foundations as advisor or helping out. And I think really, like John mentioned, I think FAST is really ahead of the pack. And I think, your logo is dream big. I think you are doing big, and keep on doing what you're doing. And you're doing amazing work.
Thank you.
So I'll say, continue the therapies that your children are having, or your educational interventions, PT, OT, speech, everything, AAC interventions. Those things will be as important as anything else, even with all these therapies. And push your kids. Don't set an artificial ceiling or limit on what they can do.
I would say participate in research, right? We want to break the ceiling of what is out there. We want to write about the kids who are speaking in full sentences. We want to write about the kids who are making their own omelets for breakfast. So please come forward, participate in research. We want to break the ceiling. What's up?
So I spent my whole career developing surveys, and I absolutely hate filling out surveys. So I understand the burden when we all come back to you all and say, hey, do you have another hour or 2 hours to complete these questionnaires or participate in these interviews? Please know that we are doing our best to try to reduce your burden, but at the same time, we recognize that you all are the experts on your children. And we don't expect clinicians or other people hiding behind the scenes know what your child's experiencing. So that's why we reach out to you. In addition, the second point being is that don't ever feel shy about giving feedback. It's through your feedback is how we understand how we can improve our research to make it centered both on your child and your family, because you're the most important person in this equation.
Well, kind of stole my answer, but over at MS Endpoint Solutions, we really value caregiver feedback. As mentioned, the caregivers really know their children best. You are very valuable to us, and we'd like to improve if there's ways for us to improve, or if there's something that we aren't necessarily looking at, and we can take a closer look at that through video assessment. We're very open to feedback, so we would appreciate any open lines of communication. Thank you.
Oh gosh, okay, mine is really personal. My son started, like I mentioned, participating in clinical trials when he was 8 years old, and it has been a roller coaster. It is not a path for the weak. And I think when I got started, I thought it was a very straight path that was going to lead us to finding out that these treatments worked, and then he was going to be put on these treatments, and then life was going to change. And I think your community is kind of where we were, a while ago, and you end up learning that it's a much more circuitous path than that. And it can be sometimes a heartbreaking one, but such a necessary one. So I guess my piece is twofold of advice. One is just to make sure that there's some balance with all of you. It can be so tempting to just rush headlong and want to do everything that you possibly can. And sometimes I look back and I wish that I had just been with him more. Secondly, I was at the pool. I talked to 2 families with Angelman syndrome, and they both said the word guilty to me. Both families, parents, said that they felt guilty, and they had different reasons, and it was both around not doing enough. And so I guess my second piece of advice is to, gosh, please give yourself some grace. Sometimes I look back and think of everything that we've all been through and realize you are the last group of people that ever need to say that word. So.
So I would just say that if you've been inspired by anything here that you've heard today, just realize that it took everybody to do this, right? It's the scientists, it's the researchers, it's the regulators, and all of you, right? All of your hard work, all of your fundraising, all of your surveys that you fill out, all the clinical trials, everyone that stepped up to do these things. We all do this as a community together. And look where we are now. This is the most hopeful time in the history of this disease. So just keep doing what you're doing.
I guess I would congratulate you on being at the vanguard of this promise of personalized medicine, and this, I'm just looking at the tagline here, dream big, for doing so as a community and really pushing the bounds. But I guess I would also, similar to what you said, I would say maybe fasten your seatbelt. This is going to be challenging. As I said earlier in my talk, biology is really complicated, and you have to be in the game to really understand what the complexities are. So just both dream big, but also sort of keep that reserve there that this is not going to happen, tomorrow. But it's a really exciting time, and congratulates this whole community.
So I'd start with keep talking to us, because we learn as much from you, and probably more than you learn from us. And the treatment that may have really worked well for your child may work well for someone else's child. And then, this might sound a little off the wall, but be aggressive about treating constipation. It makes everything worse, from seizures to movement disorders to mood. And then while you're at it, focus on sleep for your child and for yourself.
I had said I didn't cry all day, and I was very proud of myself for not doing that. Thanks, Mindy. That's not acceptable. I did a pretty good job of not crying yet until now. But from our entire community, we thank you as well. And we thank the parents for being here. It's a lot for you to be here. Leaving your kids at home, it's a lot. But we're here because of you guys, because everyone wants to learn what you're doing. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for committing to our kids. And thank you for always answering the phone when I call, because you always do. So for that, I am grateful. And you're right, it is a marathon, it's not a sprint, except tomorrow morning, there is a run with fast athletes that is actually going to be a 5K with Dave Siegel and Lisbury Kravis. So if everyone wants to meet in the lobby at 6:30 in the morning, there is a 5K, 3-mile run that fast athletes are doing. So we welcome you all to go. It's going to be on the beach and then on the boardwalk. So that was the one thing I was supposed to say. The second thing is that there is a community reception starting right outside. There's food and stuff, and then there's a ballroom with bounce houses and snacks and prizes and all sorts of things, apparently games, for all the kids. So bring the kids, but it's also for adults, for the community, just to get to know each other and to really be able to socialize, not in a gala setting, but more so just in a fun kid setting. Also, Rick Girardi is running around taking lots of pictures of our kids. He is a famous photographer who's taking family photos. If anyone is interested, go out to the front desk and sign up right outside, and he will take family photos of you and your kids. And lastly, thank you for being here. We start tomorrow morning, 8:30, bright and early. It's another long day, but it's a half a day. But I'm so proud of all of you for sticking around and staying through this, because we know how important this is for you. These are our celebrities, and you are here to be with them all day. So thank you.